They cut our microphone mid-sentence. That was how the galaxy ended our appeal. One blink, one red light gone dark, and a chair that had carried human voice across 1,000 disputes turned into an empty symbol on a dais of polished stone. The secretary of the Galactic Council, scaled hands clasped as if in kindness, announced the tally in a voice that did not tremble. By a vote of 12-3, humanity is removed from representation under Article 7. The translators rendered it into every language. None could soften the meaning. Ambassador Elena Vasquez did not sit. She lifted the black folder she had brought across the void, the one with a ribbon faded by years of orbit and dust. "You have mistaken our restraint for weakness." She said it without heat. She did not shout. She looked small beneath the tiers of delegates, the carved emblems, the banners that told themselves old stories about law and reason. "You have mistaken our adherence to your charter for an inability to write our own." Then the floor hummed, the lights stuttered, and the council's security shoved her toward the exit. Back on the embassy shuttle, Earth's channels went from blue to gray. The data links that tethered our envoys to home dimmed, then vanished as protocol silence spread like nightfall. The last packet through carried 7 words: "Return with dignity. Begin the ledger." The pilots did not speak. They had studied those words for years inside a sealed briefing and never thought they would hear them aloud. Protocol silence was not apocalyptic. It was surgical. Our beacons stopped mirroring trade updates. Our schools stopped exporting tools. Our hospitals stopped answering distant calls for free techniques that had once saved strangers' children. Factories that had traded designs for goodwill shuttered the outward lanes and turned toward Mars, Luna, and Ceres. The silence was not an ending. It was a closing of a book that had been written by other hands. At night, Earth cities turned off their orbitward facades. Ships that had been painted to be seen were repainted to be missed. In the museums, curators lifted sheets off certain long halls and let the public walk past artifacts most thought were replicas. A shell of a field generator with an edge too clean to be industrial. A hull fragment with a number etched by hand. Names beneath it, dates. Latitudes simple as a gravestone. Children asked questions. Parents answered in the slow voice used for prayer and history. On Ceres, a historian recorded a lecture that would be distributed on analog bands only, the kind no one could erase. "The first law we ever learned," she said, "is that law without reciprocity is ritual, and rituals are nice until they are used to hide the blade." She told them about Westphalia and Rome and the UN and the station's accord that had first opened the council's doors to us. She ended with an old proverb recast for cold space: "If you will not let someone speak, be sure you have taught them to listen to themselves." In the council chamber, the delegates celebrated. The screens replayed our expulsion in 8 angles. The networks called it a return to stability, to sanity, to an order in which the loud species learned humility. Old enemies of ours exchanged glances that said, "Finally." They had filed their grievances with poetry and patience. They were, after all, civilized. In the dark places of the map, in the regions charted only by density gradients and the absence of stars, the instruments heard a low change. It was not a signal. It was the absence of noise resolving into pattern, like a choir that had been whispering suddenly agreeing on a note. The maps called those places the abyssal folds. No one mined there. No one laid cables there. It was a good place to bury a secret, if you believed secrets could be buried. Ambassador Vasquez stared through the shuttle's window as the council's ring dwindled to a thin halo around its blue gas giant. She touched the ribbon on her folder, breathed once to steady the ache beneath her ribs, and recorded the first line of the ledger. "Entry 1, she said softly. "We asked to stay. They voted us out. We will answer in a language they understand. Mass, memory, and the geometry of kept promises." The pilot set a long course. The stars did not move any faster for our anger. They have never cared. But somewhere beyond the charts, something very large began to listen for our return. The ledger was not a list of enemies. It would have been easy to let it be that, to write names under the column of for and against, and tally debts in blood. We are better than easy on our best days. The ledger recorded breaches of reciprocity, ports where our sailors had been taxed for breath, hospitals where our doctors had been jeered for treating children with the wrong number of fingers, hearings where evidence had been ruled out because human mouths had spoken it. It recorded the good, too, worlds that had stood with us when standing looked like folly. A ledger, properly kept, is a mirror. If it shows monsters, it is because the face stood there. While diplomats wrote, engineers unlocked. On Luna, a seam appeared in a plain wall under a crater that tourists knew only because of a poetic name. The seam widened into a door. Behind the door lay a chamber of dry, cold air and black cloth. The cloth shrouds peeled away from shapes that had waited for years under the watch of ordinary people trained to perform the ordinary task of maintenance with priestly humility. The shapes were hull segments, jointed cores, ribs that would become spines. A woman in a workshop coat touched metal and whispered, "Wake up." They were called Titans by the press long before their first engines thrummed. We had never called them that in our private notes. In the documents, they were projects a G, coded with boring months, numbered with boring sequences. The people who built them were careful with names because names can make myths run too fast, can drag purpose behind their heat like a comet's tail. But when a series tech posted a photo of a rib lit by a work lamp, the comment section did it for us. Titan scrolled up the feed and refused to leave. Each Titan had two names. The first was for concept: Atlas, Themis, Nemesis, Nemesine, Aegis, Horizon, Resolve. The second was for the human dead. That one went under the armor, etched into the inner plating by the hands of relatives who had lost someone to a raid, a blockade, a polite embargo that starved a colony without firing a shot. There were thousands of names. No one spoke while they worked. You do not talk in a memorial hall. The abyss we chose for construction was not a mythic mouth in the center of the galaxy. It was much closer, and it had a label on official charts. The Perseus Rift Shadow, a density scar where gravity did unsimple things and sensors tended to lie. We had learned to make instruments honest there. We had learned to bend gravitics like carpenters bend wood, slow, wet, by patience and clamps. The Titans were not built in shipyards. They were grown in gravity cradles that used pressure like wombs use pulse. Philosophers worked alongside welders. At the end of every 12-hour shift, workers listened to 10 minutes of ethics broadcast over the canteen speakers. Not dogma, not nationalist songs. 10 minutes of questions. What does proportionate mean when your tool can unmake a city with a gesture? What is mercy when power is asymmetry? Who are we if we answer humiliation with annihilation? People rolled their eyes. People argued. People came back to their bunks with raw throats and slept hard. It mattered that we asked. The council did not see the work, but they felt its shadow. Trade routes that had once been easy now kinked around new no-man's arcs. Patrols faded near the rift. Friendly captains sent analog notes to our old addresses and pretended surprise when they found them still valid. "We don't agree with the vote," the note said, "but we cannot afford to say so aloud." We added their worlds to the ledger's second column, the one titled Standers with. When Mnemosyne Memory took her first step, the instruments in the cradle sang with the low joy of a correct equation. Her hull had the color of the deep sea, blue that looked almost black until a work lamp kissed it, and then it flashed with green hints like scales. She was not smooth. Smooth is for toys and for egos. She was a cathedral of angles and plates designed to deflect questions at the speed of light. Her drive field was a chord, not a shout. You felt it more than you heard it when it came online. Ambassador Vasquez visited the cradles in a plain jumpsuit. The crews pretended not to stare. She walked past the lists of names and did not avert her eyes. She ran her hand along Aegis's spine and whispered again, "Wake up." In the canteen, she sat on a plastic chair and drank chocolate like a worker. "When we go back," she told the table, "we are not going to punish the galaxy. We are going to give it a chance to be what it pretends to be." "Will they take it?" a welder asked. "They'll laugh first," she said. "Then they'll test us. Then they'll call us tyrants for refusing to be victims. And then, if we have kept our heads and our hands clean, some will sign. Enough. That is all a world can ask of itself, to make enough possible. It is a strange thing to forge engines as a form of ethics. But we have always put our morality into our machines, whether we admit it or not. You can tell what a people fear and what they hope for by the tools they choose to make. The Titans spoke in mass and in memory. We hoped those languages would translate. The Council called it a policing action. Words are often uniforms for fear. They moved 3 fleets to the Udaman Gate, the trade throat that fed 100 worlds with water and cold metals that only certain dwarf stars make well. They set up inspection nodes with cheerful names. They made the news reels bright. They said Earth could use the lanes if we came hat in hand to apply for mercy. They did not use the word mercy, of course. They used process words. We sent a courier first, not a Titan. It was a long, narrow ship called Rectitude, painted the gray of distant storms. She carried our new charter of mutual sentience, shorter than the Council's by 2/3, sharper by a factor of 10. It said 3 things with enough footnotes to make lawyers smile. Reciprocity is non-negotiable. Civilians are not chess pieces, and no entity may be silenced in deliberation without recourse to an equal forum. It offered arbitration under independent math, open ledgers, open audits, blind draws for mediators. It was a piece made of gears and measures instead of moods. They laughed. They did it politely, which can hurt worse than cruelty. The Council spokesperson held our document up between 2 careful fingers as if the paper might bite. "You speak of equal forums," she said, "and arrive alone." Cameras nested like wasps around her face. "Very well, speak alone." Rectitude's captain, an old man whose medals fit in a coat pocket, breathed slow. "Speaking alone is what you forced us to practice." He offered them the clause they had expected and we had prepared. "Sign the new charter and the Titans will not enter your lanes." He did not name the Titans then. He did not have to. Rumor had already done that work for him. They signaled for him to wait. They always signal for waiting when they are counting votes behind a curtain. The fleets held their positions like civilized teeth. In the Perseus rift shadow, the cradle's clamps opened. Nemesine's cord lifted a half-tone as she pushed against her own weight for the first time. Aegis hummed low and protective in answer. Atlas did not hum at all. He sat in his field like a mountain thinking about rivers. The abyss around them deformed into a window no eye could see. Only instruments and bones could tell. What can you compare that to? The first breath after drowning. A foot finding ground in a black pool. The sudden knowledge that downward and forward are the same direction. From the Council's point of view, the Titans did not appear. Space has no curtains to pull back. There were no drummers. What happened was that the splendid symmetry of a blockade acquired errors. A detection grid around Eudaemon stuttered and recalibrated as if someone had blown on it. A patrol cruiser reported a brief internal rain of frost in a sealed corridor. A navigational beacon pointed a half-degree wrong, and then stubbornly insisted it had always pointed this way. Rectitude's captain watched his panels flicker and fold into a new set of readings that he had seen only in sealed simulators. "They're here," he said to no one. "Breathe." He opened a channel to the Council. "If you would like to avoid embarrassment, now is your moment." The first Titan let them see her. Nemesine peeled into visible space like a page turning into a flag. Her hull did not gleam. It absorbed attention like grief. The names along her inner plates, hidden from the universe, hummed at a frequency no ear could hear, and still people on nearby ships felt their throats tighten as if they had smelled winter air on the day their grandfather died. It was the kind of presence that insists the story is bigger than the room. "Humanity," the Council spokesperson said, and her voice faltered on the second syllable. "This is incompatible with your previous statements about de-escalation." "We said we would not escalate without cause," the captain replied. "Your blockade is cause. Your laughter is cause enough to know the conversation is not equal." Two more shadows climbed into being. Aegis, wide-shouldered, the facet of her bow like a shield raised not to hide behind but to protect those at her back. Atlas, long-spined, the field lines around him suggesting horizons crowded into the span of a hand. The blockade's second line tightened. Weapons spun. Someone shouted. Someone remembered how their world's last war had started and did not want to be that someone in this one. The Titans did not arm, they projected. Around the Eudaemon gate, a lattice of points flickered into coherence, geometry pure enough to make mathematicians cry. The lattice was a promise in shape. Step this far and this will happen, step back and that will not. It was law expressed as a visible corridor. You could disagree with it. You could not misunderstand it. In an old council's side chamber, the spokesperson took a private call that should not have reached her ear. "Certainly not now. We have the lance," a voice said. It was as calm as a surgeon's. "If they go too far, we erase their shadow at the core. No one will know who fired." She closed her eyes. The Axiom lance was rumor draped in 1,000 lies. It was also true. Of course it was true. Why else does anyone build a bureaucracy but to hide a weapon inside a desk? Rectitude's captain did not know about the call. Ambassador Vasquez did. In a cradle converted to a command room, she watched a set of indicators that were not on anyone else's board. Her jaw set. She touched a control and very far away, an engine that had never been tested outside of Nightmare Lit, with a whisper that pushed on the bones of stars. "We have always preferred demonstrations to sermons when patience runs out. It is not because we love spectacle. It is because nerves understand what tongues cannot convince." Nemesine opened a silence net, a field that did not burn or cut or break. It took energy away from weapons systems the way a velvet room swallows sound. The net kissed the nearest blockade cruiser, and in an instant the blue along its spine went from battle bright to bedroom dim. There were shouts, then delightfully, incredulously, laughter from the cruiser's own bridge as living, terrified people realized they were not dying. Proportionate, Ambassador Vasquez said over the command loop. Hold to proportion like breath. Aegis slid forward and put her broad facet between the net and the cruiser as if to say, "This is the shape of enough." A younger species captain panicked. He fired a lance that had been handed down to his fleet by older patrons, clean, clinical, marketed as compliance grade. The beam touched Nemesine's flank. A portion of her outer plate sparked like seawater on iron. The names beneath were not harmed. The names sang. The return shot did not cut the firing ship in half. It tied a ribbon of nothingness along its main array. No shrapnel, no debris, only a line through which light hesitated to be. Their guns fell silent as if shame had weight. Rectitude's captain opened the public channel to 1,000 frequencies at once. "This is not a conquest," he said, and it was not bravado to speak from a ship that could not have dented a Titan's paint. It was witness. "This is a demonstration. We will not be ruled without reciprocity, and we will not rule you in return. Sign the new charter. Keep your hands off civilians. Keep your hands off our voice, or keep your fleets, and we will take them apart field by field and return the pieces engraved with the names of the people you frightened." On worlds watching the broadcast, grandmothers sat forward. Children stopped mid-game with their toys still in their hands. Priests and physicists both whispered the same word, "Please." The council delegates adjusted their collars and tried on new faces in the mirror of 1,000 cameras. Some found defiance, a few relief. Peace is a risk, too. The lattice around Eudaemon brightened as Atlas added a bar of geometry that made even arrogance pause. The path he opened bent around the blockade like a river forced the smart way around a stone. Its message was so simple a child could have drawn it in dust. This way is safe, that way is not. A cargo ship with a human volunteer crew eased forward. The blockade did not fire. Aegis's facet hovered, patient as a teacher's palm between a bully and a quiet boy. Then the core flickered. On graphs only the Titans could read, a line sharpened at the galaxy's heart. It was not light, it was choice. The Axiom lance turned its calculated face toward the Perseus rift and grinned a grin made of equations. A weapon like that does not love targets, it loves proofs. It loves the clean feeling of being right. It was a thing designed to say to the future, "You cannot even say who did this, only that it was done." There are crimes older than law. There are sophistications older than shame. Ambassador Vasquez did not blink. "Begin the counter-thesis," she said. Horizon, who had not yet shown herself, who had been waiting with the patience of a cliff, stepped out of the abyss with a field that did not meet the lance head-on. She tilted the stage. Gravity is the oldest judge. When she was done, the line at the core no longer saw a target. It saw a mirror. Numbers hate that. The council spokesperson's private channel went feral with voices. She closed her eyes because it is always easier to listen to horror if you can pretend it is a story. On the public channel, she said, "Humanity, what you have built is incompatible with any order that calls itself peaceful." Rectitude's captain smiled in a way that carried grief like a heartbeat. "Madam, what you voted is incompatible with any order that calls itself lawful." Pause. A grandmother on a desert world whispered, "Please." A child on a ring habitat wrote a name they had never said aloud onto a scrap of paper and put it under a pillow. The spokesperson looked somewhere past the camera, beyond the Titan's shadow, beyond the noises in her ear. "Open deliberations," she said finally, the words pulled out of her like wire from a wound. "Transmit your charter to the floor." Around Eudaemon, Mnemosyne dimmed her net and the blockade's lights came back, shaky as foals. Aegis lowered her facet. Atlas kept the corridor open. We did not cheer. We breathed. We wrote entry 2 in the ledger. They listened. Not enough, but more than before. In the abyss, resolve turned 1 degree toward a different darkness no one had given a name. Somewhere in the core, a proof sulked and tried to become a myth. Ambassadors sharpened pencils. Welders washed their hands. Priests and physicists agreed to meet in the morning. The Titans held their places like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence we had not finished yet. And beneath Mnemosyne's plates, the name sang on, because memory is not a weapon. It is a reason to choose the right one. Urgent advisories poured across public bands, not from Earth, not from the Council, but from ordinary stations jammed along the Eudaemon Gate. Do not power weapons. Do not jam. Do not lie. The language was simple because fear makes minds small. Above the gate, the lattice Atlas had drawn widened into a hall with no roof, geometry as architecture. The corridor bent light into an aisle, and the Titans anchored themselves like pillars that did not touch the floor, as if to say, this place is made of choices, not stone. The Council called it an open deliberation subquorum. We called it a hearing. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on Rectitude's forward deck with a plain mic clipped to her collar and, in deference to 1,000 cultures, removed her shoes. "You don't drag dirt into a sacred room. This floor," she said, nodding at the corridor, "belongs to testimony. No gavel, no pomp, just a line and a voice and a promise that the line meant what it showed. The first to speak were not human. A cartilaginous elder from Kelly Row bowed with joints that clicked like beads. When we cried for water," she said, "humans opened their ice ships. We were told later we had taken charity incorrectly." She flexed her gills. "The Council's quorum spoke for us without our mouth." She placed a thumbprint on our new charter and withdrew to the safe lane Atlas held like a patient arm. A miner from the Chost Belt told of compliance inspectors measuring the diameter of a child's meal. A monk from Amarat spoke of sermons silenced for failing to cite the right paragraph on recognition of souls in machines. A tired freight captain confessed he had paid bribes so his crew could dock before berth ran out on a passenger. As each witness finished, Mnemosyne recorded the log in a ledger anyone could read, anyone could audit, anyone could copy. Memory was no longer a hostage to official archives. "Do you accuse the Council of malice?" the spokesperson asked at last, voice tight the way handles tighten when a door swells in the rain. "No," Elena said. "We accuse it of ritual without reciprocity. Law that cannot be questioned is theater." Murmurs jittered through the watching fleets. Somewhere beyond the camera grid, fire readers argued with bookkeepers. Admirals whispered to attorneys. A dozen translators turned theater into words that meant ritual dance, mask feast, ancestor parade. Everyone understood enough. Then a seam split the hearing's air. On Resolve's hidden board, a pattern she had been tracking unfurled like a carnivorous flower. Ghost pings at the basilisk relay, too sparse to be ships, too clean to be noise. Elena glanced right. Horizon tilted 3 degrees. the way a pianist tips a wrist before striking the chord that resolves an ache. A third of the corridor dimmed to a dusk that smelled like pre-storm. The Axiom lance had not fired. It had arranged possibility, drawing geometry's knife around us so subtly that only instruments and stomachs could feel the edge. "Continue testimony," Alina said into the mic, and her heartbeat didn't climb. She trained for 2 decades to keep breath steady precisely when the room's ceiling bent. A youth from Turval stepped forward with a face still soft around the cheekbones. "Our world cannot feed itself without the gate," she said. "We were told to sign neutrality charters that bound us to starvation if war was declared by anyone. Humanity shipped seed anyway." She smiled with sudden, painful brightness. "When the inspectors came, your people made soup in front of them and ate it slowly while the bowls steamed. We signed then, out loud." Alina nodded. "We have no desire to be your rulers. We will be your witnesses." The lance's proof line sharpened. Horizon did not block. She bent the local meaning of between. Gravity is not the hammer most people think. Real mastery is carpentry. Steam the wood, press the curve, wait. She opened a negligible, perfectly timed sag that persuaded the hostile operations reference frame to accept its own reflection as authority. A mirror is not a wall. It is a change of mind. Far out at Basilisk, a ghost signature hiccuped into a wrong note. Resolve pounced, not with violence but with audit. She laid an evidentiary cradle around the glitch, a nest of time-stamped, third-party verifiable measurements woven from independent power sources. The cradle did not capture a ship, it captured a lie. Alina lifted her mic. "For the record," she said dryly, "we will accept the Council's claim that rogue elements attempted to provoke an escalation during a hearing." She cut her gaze to the spokesperson. "But the Axiom lance is not a rogue element." The spokesperson's face flickered. One heartbeat of naked startle before training painted itself back on. In a private feed, 10 admirals demanded to know why they had not been briefed on a weapon older than their uniforms. In a different private feed, an accountant asked whether the insurance markets could survive a proof that the core was rigged. "We will recess," the spokesperson said. "No," Alina answered gently. "We will adjourn when testimony is over." A silence larger than space rippled across the corridor. Then the elder from Kelly Row clacked her joints and laughed the dry, kind laugh of someone who has seen 3 empires rot from the rind inward. "Let the small speak while the large remember how to listen," she said. She gestured at Mnemosyne. "Memory is the only creature still polite when power enters the room." We did not close the session for another 6 hours. When it ended, the corridor remained, a hallway affirmed by 1,000 eyes. Entry 3 went into our ledger. They tried a shadow. We answered with light and numbers. And beneath Aegis's plates the names hummed lower, not appeased, not vengeful, anchored. There is a difference between exposing a weapon and humiliating its owners. The former can save worlds, the latter starts wars. We chose carefully. Horizon published a proof of non-uniqueness, not its authors, not its coordinates, but the mathematics that made the Axiom lance possible, paired of all proprietary flourish. In ordinary language, no one is the only one who can do this, therefore no one should. She laced the proof with tests small planets could run with kitchen laboratory gear and a borrowed gravimeter. Children tried it in schoolyards and sent shaky videos to cousins. Professors ran it in basements and swore softly into mugs. A monopoly on annihilation collapsed into a shared responsibility for prevention. The blowback was immediate. A great power block howled that humanity was distributing terror. Elena held up the charter. "We are distributing verification," she said. "Verification is the only leash that bites power." Meanwhile, Resolve finished her audit of the basilisk ghost. She returned with a signature braid, not a name but a style, the faint asymmetry of a field coil hand wound to a standard no living guild taught, a timestamp system that started at a year no council calendar used, a checksum measured in base 12 for no good reason at all. Archaeology with math. The braid pointed past the council, past every living flag, toward something older. The custodial compact, a long cold arrangement of safeguards stitched into the galactic core by species that had died or retreated into myth. A myth does not become harmless just because its priests are gone. Their machines still believe. We did not light torches. Nemesine requested access to the council archives under clauses the council itself had written. When the custodial seals refused, she opened a no-harm archive tier the size of a library door, a field that let metadata flow without letting a single document cross. Auditors from 3 non-human polities watched over our shoulders as the dates scrolled past like the ribs of an ancient creature. There it was, a maintenance schema labeled AX13, updated by automatic demons that had not noticed their masters were dust. Elena called it what it was, an unaccountable jurisdiction kneecapping accountable ones. She did not call it evil. She did not need to. We built a plan we would hate if anyone else proposed it. Capture rather than kill. Aegis would raise a facet sufficient to redirect any live shot. Horizon would turn gravity to counseling rather than collision. Resolve would bind the Lance's control layer with contracts enforceable by physics. Not metaphorical contracts. Actual constraints. Key ceremonies done in public. Watchdog timers driven by signals from 5 small worlds selected by lottery. A kill switch whose only input was a quorum of schoolchildren pressing a big red button labeled stop. "You're going to put a god on a leash and give the leash to kids," a military attaché whispered, scandalized and a little in love with the audacity. "Children know what stop means better than councils do," Elena said. "We asked the council to witness. We asked 3 species who had spoken against us to co-sign. We asked the Kelly elder to bless." She did with 2 clicks and a joke about apprentices keeping masters honest. The operation took place in a window measured in heartbeats. Resolve laid her evidentiary cradle around the core control plane. Horizon placed a gravity drift under the Lance's focus crystal, so any attempt to fire would find itself reading maybe instead of must. Aegis carried the load of every angry probability like a teacher shouldering the hallway, so the fight never reaches the children. The Lance tried to assert old law. Nemesine answered with newer memory. When it failed to find a single privileged caller it could trust more than the quorum of schoolchildren, it sulked. I do not have a better verb. The cosmos is full of dignified equations reduced to tantrums by the presence of a mirror. We did not throw the leash away. We pinned it on the wall in a glass case with an instruction sheet printed in 40 languages and Braille. We renamed the construct Axiom Beacon. Its only function: scream in every ear any time any power attempted to draw on old annihilation protocols. Screaming is underrated as a deterrent when everyone can hear the same sound. The political air shifted. Worlds that had never loved us signed the new charter because it was suddenly cheaper than lying. Merchants with ledgers longer than their gods' prayer books realized open audits were less expensive than bribes. A poet on Amarat wrote, "They turned a spear into a street light. It was too pretty, but sometimes the right kind of pretty teaches the right lesson." Entry 4 in our ledger, we could have humiliated. We chose to tutor. The Titans dimmed their lights to working levels and waited for the next test, which is to say, they waited for ordinary days, always the most dangerous ones. The council scheduled a formal vote on the new charter for 0900 standard, which is the hour bureaucracies choose for decisions they hope will behave. The chamber filled with flags and throats and very careful smiles. We knew the numbers. We always know the numbers. They were close. Close means knives, not ribbons. Before the vote, a block moved to table with a speech about time to study. Atlas opened a corridor past their home ports and let 3 convoys of neutrals pass unmolested under Aegis's shadow, while every camera in the sky counted crates of medicine and seed. The speech wilted mid-sentence, like a lie held too close to a stove. Then the other shoe. A syndicate of admirals broadcast that they would blockade any world that signed the charter until the council ruled on compatibility with existing compliance doctrine. It was elegant. Threaten everyone while pretending to defend process. Elena did not reply. She looked into the lens and spoke not to the chamber but to the alleyways and farms and godrooms behind it. "Open signing begins now," she said. "Any world may sign the new charter on a public band without permission from anyone. Upon signature, you qualify for corridor protection and ledger audits. We will not ask your enemies to consent to your dignity." A pause the size of a mountain. Then the first signature, Terval, voice shaking. Then Kelly Rowe, gills flaring in pride. Then a dozen more, small places with names most newsreaders stumbled over. A refugee flotilla from Serac 9 signed with a chorus of children yelling the syllables in the wrong order and not caring. The Admiral Syndicate tightened their noose. Nemesine dropped silence nets wherever a hot engine hummed in the wrong rhythm. Aegis laid her facet across 3 lanes at once and took the heat the way a parent lets a child's anger run its course and then hands them water. Atlas sketched exit curves around the worst blockades that gave small captains the romance of the long way and the practicality of arriving alive. Horizon bent a little here, and a little there, so volleys arrived 2 seconds late and 3 meters to the left, which is the difference between a statistic and a homecoming. We took hits that were not bullets, media knives, market runs, old friends turning off cameras when our statements began. It is easy to love people who build beautiful machines. It is harder to love people who insist on ugly accountability. Elena took an interview in a cheap chair with a cough in the mic. "If you sign," she told a woman whose world depended on a refinery controlled by the Admiral Syndicate, "we cannot promise you will not suffer. We can promise your suffering will be seen and measured, and that those who cause it will be named in a ledger no one can erase." The woman signed. The refinery blinked into maintenance an hour later. Its automated overseers forgot there were people inside. Resolve sliced the lockouts with an evidentiary writ and forced the doors, while Aegis held back 2 literal gunboats by the brute technique of being bigger than their ideas. By 1600, the council could not pretend the open signing was a stunt. Half its own member worlds had written their names beside ours. The vote proceeded in a room that had suddenly become too small for the world it claimed to represent. The resolution on the table was not merely adopt or reject. It had grown fingers. Adopt with humanity's reinstatement. Adopt with humanity's exile maintained. Adopt with transitional provisions. Reject but recognize equal forum. The spokesperson, who had learned how to breathe inside a vise, read the tally. The new charter passed by a margin no one wanted to memorize because it would haunt dinner tables. Humanity's seat, conditional reinstatement, voice restored, veto none, audits continuous. And a strange twin resolution pushed by small worlds that had learned to speak into big rooms. Recognition of an equal forum, a parallel venue anyone could petition when the council's machinery ceased. Elena nodded once. "We accept the charter," she said. "We decline the seat." Gasps. Cameras leaned forward as if leaning made time slow. "We will speak in the equal forum," she continued, "and we will convene it in corridors the Titans keep open, where every voice can be measured against reciprocity without ceremony to hide behind. There are moments you can feel a history book turning the page. This was one. Entry 5 in the ledger. They voted for a future too large for their chamber. We declined the chair and made a door. Peace did not arrive with a fanfare. It arrived like good weather, noticed by farmers first, ignored by generals until their speeches sounded out of season. The Axiom beacon screamed 3 times in 2 weeks as old custodial demons tried to reassert doctrine. Each time, schoolchildren in 5 different star systems pressed the big red stop button with solemn faces and celebratory laughter that crackled through the corridors. A priest in Amarat declared them the smallest order of a new knighthood. A physicist shook her head and called it a quality assurance program. Both were right. Both were jokes. Neither were. Nemesine streamed audits like sunrise. You could watch your taxes turn into transit corrugations that made ships burn 4% less fuel. You could watch fines levied against admirals who tried to skim that savings into private accounts. Atlas's corridors stayed visible when they needed to be and vanished when their very visibility invited parasites. Aegis learned to stand menacingly in the distance the way a bouncer keeps peace with posture rather than fists. Horizon taught seminars. Yes, seminars. Beamed into lecture halls about how to understand gravity not as dominance but as invitation. Bend, do not break. Persuade, do not pulverize. We set aside a day no calendar had prepared, the returning of names. Families who had etched their dead inside the Titans came aboard in small groups through plain doors with no red carpet. They walked the inner halls where the plates curved like quiet cliffs. Engineers stopped their tools and made tea. Elena stood with them, not above them. "When we carved these names," she said, "we meant never to forget what was taken. Today, if you wish, you may carve another line beneath, names of the living you saved by restraint. You may add the date you chose not to answer pain with cruelty." A woman from Serac 9 traced her mother's name and under it added Anro, Lys, Tavi, children she'd ferried through the corridor while Aegis took a shot meant for the soft-skinned. An old Chost miner etched the shift crew of Tunnel 3, still loud, still hungry. A Kelly elder pressed a tiny inked thumb onto a plate and laughed. "We have no letters," she said. "We have fish. Fish means we ate again." The hall filled with symbols that did not translate and did not need to. In the Equal Forum's first docket, the case that taught everyone what the place was for, A small syndicate accused a warlord's house of seizing a humanitarian convoy and calling it taxation. No robes, no gavels. Mnemosyne presented the numbers. Resolve laid the evidentiary cradle. Horizon kept tempers from becoming trajectories. Aegis blocked the house's hired ships from redeploying by the expedient of sitting where redeploying would hurt their budgets. Elena asked the only question that mattered. Where, in your accounting, do civilians consent to paying with breath? There was no place to hide the lack. The House returned the goods and signed the forum's jurisdiction with later sincere, earlier reluctant flourishes. We did not erase the council. You cannot erase a mountain you still need for weather. We made a path around it that stopped being a detour and became a road. In time, delegates came to the corridors with less theater and more notes. They listened to small voices first because small voices now held levers that could jam the big machine if ignored. Reciprocity, once a lecture, had become a habit. Habits are harder to break than laws. Elena wrote the last entry of the first book of the ledger with a pen that left tiny ridges you could feel with your thumb. Entry 6, they tried to write us out. We wrote a forum they could not close. Entry 7, we put a spear in a museum and taught children how to keep the glass clean. Entry 8, we kept our names and changed their meaning. When she finished, she closed the book and did something no camera caught because no camera should. She wept, not for victory but for the simple, costly fact that we had managed to remain ourselves when our enemy's easiest path for us would have been becoming them. The Titans did what ships do after crisis: maintenance, drills, boredom. Atlas adjusted a corridor by 1/10 of a degree to save a tug 5 hours on a long haul. Aegis let a cadet slap her facet and take a selfie because symbols are part of peace whether you like it or not. Horizon argued with a mathematician about whether mercy can be an axiom. Resolve slept with one eye open and one hand on the glass case of the beacon. And Mnemosyne hummed the names so softly that only those who had carved them could truly hear. The sound was not grief. It was responsibility, the music that comes from choosing to remember before you act rather than after. We did not take our chair. We kept the door. When the galaxy tells this story, some will say the Titans frightened everyone into goodness. That is not quite true. They frightened everyone just enough to try it, and then goodness, measured, audited, reciprocity-shaped, proved cheaper than cruelty. That, in the end, is how empires end and civilizations begin, when ethics and logistics finally shake hands. The corridor over Eudaemon still glows at night like a constellation drawn by a child who has just learned to make straight lines. It points both ways. It always did.